Hi everybody, it's Chris Kandai here and welcome to FAQ, Faith in Quarantine. We are thinking about the book of Daniel because it's got so much to teach us about how to live well under difficult circumstances. And this week, oh my goodness, we are looking at Daniel chapter 6, which many of you will remember, maybe from Sunday school. But again, there's so much beauty in here, it's worth us just diving straight in. So you remember last time we looked, it was the end of the Babylonian Empire. King Belshazzar had taken all the goblets out of his storage that had been in the temple, and he used them, and God brought judgment on him. And we've been thinking about this kind of global moment where there's all sorts of injustice going on. We're hearing about all these terrible things that have happened, the oppression of black people, particularly George Floyd in America and his murder. And how do we live well under those difficult circumstances? Well, we saw Daniel trust God's judgment, that he isn't angry, he isn't bolshy, he offers gracious witness to the coming judgment of God and calls people to make a response. And I think we need to do the same, that we can have a sense of dignity and grace and trust in God. Righteous anger, of course, is all right. Jesus turned tables over. But there's also a place, as there was for Daniel, to be calm and yet still point people to the judgment of God and what that's going to mean for all of us, that all of us stand guilty before God, but all of us need to turn away from sin. All of us need to honour people as made in the image of God. And so that's where we left things yesterday. But Daniel chapter 6 picks up what happens with the new regime now that the Medes and Persians are in power. And chapter 6, it pleased Darius, he's the new king, to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. Interesting. So the king, Darius, has come in and he's used a lot of the existing structures. How did he pick who he would trust and who he wouldn't? Well, Daniel seems to have gravitas and known importance and reach and influence, and so he's employed by the new king. Daniel outlasted Nebuchadnezzar and his son and their rule over Babylon. Now the new king is in town. He's recognised those gifts in Daniel, and that often happens with civil servants. You might have been seeing a lot about civil servants recently, but they are non-political appointees. They serve whichever government in control, and many civil servants faithfully work under very different governments. Well, here is Daniel doing something similar. Verse 3, now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Daniel is just a faithful man of God. He's clear about what he believes. He's clear about who he is. He serves the king, but he serves because he wants to serve God. That's his order of preference. It's God first, king second, and career somewhere way after. And yet the new king sees that, recognises this dignity, integrity, honesty in Daniel, and wants to appoint him to a new role. But that causes problems. Verse 4, at this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. Oh, wow. We've been looking a lot at reputation and integrity, haven't we? We've seen what happens when people say something and do the opposite. Our nation went into a lot of turmoil around the Dominic Cummings scandals. The feeling was that he had said this was how we ought to live as a nation, and then he'd broken it. And that sense of hypocrisy has ignited national indignation. And whether it's true or not, fair or not, that's the mood. And Daniel, even his enemies can't find anything bad about him. He's a man of his word. And oh man, I really aspire to be like that, if only it were true. It's something I want, that my words and my deeds, my thoughts and my actions, my heart and my head and my body are all connected. We're one being in front of God. We want to live in front of him well. So what happens? Verse, they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. They thought they found a weak point. We'll use religion as a means that we can exploit and make things difficult for Daniel. Now, many Christians throughout generations, many believers throughout generations have had that happen to them, that people have thought, okay, there's no way to get at them. We'll find some kind of religious persecution that we could employ. And many Christians throughout the centuries have been faithful to God despite people trying to get them out of their role because of jealousy. What's Daniel going to do? Verse 6. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, "O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians." That's going to come up again and again. Once it's in writing, nothing can change according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. Point one, Darius does not seem to be a very strong leader. His advisors have come to him and told him what to do. And they've told him what to do based on stroking his ego. They're trying to make Darius feel better about himself, but also at the same time get Darius to do what they want. He's getting to do their dirty work. And Darius isn't savvy enough or wise enough or strong enough as a leader to do that, which is odd because he's just overthrown the mightiest empire the world had seen up to that moment, Babylon. So why isn't he stronger? Not quite sure. Let's have a look. Verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knee and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. "Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den?" The king answered, "The decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be repealed." That's like a little mantra that no one can break the law of the Medes and the Persians. That's another way in which King Darius is weak, in that he listens to his advisors, but he also finds himself caught up in this culture that once something's written down, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, it can't be changed. So he's weak in all sorts of levels. And Daniel, on the other hand, is incredibly strong. He knows that there's a death warrant out for anyone who prays to any other god except King Darius. But it doesn't stop him, just as he usually did. Daniel didn't make a show of this just to say, "Hey, look at me." He just went on his normal business. He was a person of integrity and faithfulness, and so he prays 3 times a day. Was his discipline. I don't know what your discipline of prayer is. Mine's pretty undisciplined. But Daniel had a rhythm and a rule of life that 3 times a day he would pray. And he'd pray in the direction of Jerusalem, not something that everyone has to do. It's not the same as the Islamic faith where you're supposed to pray in the direction of Mecca. I guess Daniel was just remembering where he came from. It was another way of rooting himself and anchoring himself to the history and tradition of Israel, that was his God, that was his homeland. It was the God of Israel, and therefore he would carry on. Verse 13, then the king said, "Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day." When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until the sundown to save him. I guess we've seen how some leaders need their civil servants and will do everything they can in order to rescue them. Well, Darius tries his best. He doesn't want to break any confidences according to the Medes and the Persians, and he doesn't want to upset everybody, so he kind of does the minimum he can get away with. He doesn't really put himself in a lot of danger. He doesn't sacrifice anything, but he did try a little bit at least. Verse 15, then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, "Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." Do you see how the repetition's working here? I feel like this is a fireside tale that someone would read out and their kids would listen in, or it was written in a way that there would be oral memory. You could hear it and then remember to say it again, like a joke gets passed down verbally, orally through the generations. I think that's why you get this repetition. It's almost funny, isn't it? Nothing can break the law of the Medes and the Persians. Who's powerful enough to transcend those kind of laws? Well, we're going to find out in a minute. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." Don't you love it? All through the book of Daniel, whoever's in control ends up being upstaged by God. They think they are the sovereign king over the nation, but actually they have these little throwaway lines, or they end up making these professions of faith, or God turns up and upends everything. So may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue. God is going to rescue him. We know how this story is going to go. But there's something about Daniel's life. He's a person of integrity. His faith is integral to who he is. His boss knows about his faith. He's never hidden it, and he won't back down from it. And that wins the respect of someone like King Darius, who will bow down to public opinion, who will be pushed around by the laws of the Medes and the Persians. And maybe he's recognizing in something in Daniel that's truly courageous, a man of conviction and principle, not like Darius himself. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the ring of the nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. All right, maybe he really did like Daniel. Maybe there was a kind of affection there. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep, he wouldn't even, have his, lute player come in and play him some music, and there is this sense of loss, but he's still weak and feeble. And how is this story going to end? Verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Oh, so connected was Daniel to his God that every conversation that Darius has with him references his God. There's something about Daniel that his identity is so known, both publicly and privately, to connect with God, that everyone is aware of his love for God. Friends, is that true of us? Does everyone know how much we love God? So whether they believe in him or not, they recognize that our lives, our identity, our purpose, our hopes are connected with our God. That's the kind of witness I want to be, and that was the witness that Daniel was. Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angels, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Just like Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego. No wounds were on them, not even the smell of smoke on their clothes. God is able to rescue completely. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. That's a bit of a tough one. I don't know how we read that to children. And we're not saying that was the right thing to do. Darius is a bit of an odd guy. We've seen him to be weak, and now he wants to show some strength, so he murders women and children. Again, not a great king. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations and men of every language throughout the land, "May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." So Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So Daniel chapter 6 ends with a pagan king paying tribute to God and telling the nations about him, and making sure that wherever the Jewish nation is, their beliefs are going to be protected. It's incredible, isn't it? That the nation of Israel are being punished for their disobedience to God, but for those that will be faithful to him, God sticks by them, he rescues them, and somehow God's name is lifted up. God's glory is amplified even through these really difficult circumstances. Now hear this. Throughout history, many people have been killed because of their faith. And it wasn't because they were any lesser than Daniel. In the book of Hebrews, it talks about some people getting sawn in two, some people being crucified for their faith. And it talks about them in the hall of fame of faith. Some people think if you die, or if you're ill, or if you're poor, that's somehow the judgment of God on you. That isn't true. But sometimes, because of the messed up world that we live in, people die, and that's the way that they bring honour to God. People like Stephen, I'm going to be speaking about him in a sermon tonight in Oxford. The stoning of Stephen was a turning point in the Apostle Paul's life, and Stephen dying for his faith wasn't showing that he somehow hadn't measured up to the same faith as Daniel. Weirdly, God sometimes rescues and sometimes he doesn't. Do you remember what Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego said in the fiery furnace? Our God is able to save us, but even if he doesn't, we will not bow down to you. That's the chant, the call of faith, the courageous faith is to say to God, I believe you're able to rescue me, but even if you don't, you've probably got a good reason. You're going to do something else. I can still trust you. Ultimately, you will rescue me, because death is not the end of me. Death is not the worst thing that can happen to me. There is life everlasting in the coming kingdom of God. But for me, I love this story. I love the book of Daniel, because it says that God can judo move any difficult circumstances so that God's honour is preserved. Through the disobedience of his own people, God is able to win glory for himself from around the nations. And we have in Daniel a model of how to live well under pressure. However tough it gets, however enclosed we feel, however locked in we are, we need to stay faithful to our God, and ultimately our God will be faithful to us. Friends, I hope this passage inspired you as much as it does me, that we need to hold on to our God and ultimately trust that he will hold on to us. Thanks so much for listening. See you again on FAQ.